Lovely to have so many people here in the room to talk about digital equity. It's fantastic and really become a bit of a passion piece for a lot of us here at Casey. So I just wanted to give a bit of a background, a brief background to, I guess, the journey towards developing the framework, how we went about that broadly to actually get it all together, and what some of those next steps are. Then we'll get Mandy and Laura to speak through some of the other aspects of how we're using innovation to approach the problem. So first off, what is digital equity and why the focus now? So digital equity, how we've defined it, is to embed fair access and benefit in digital systems through recognising and identifying the particular needs of different communities. It's an approach that aims for all individuals and communities to have the digital tools, skills and confidence needed to participate in our increasingly online society, democracy and economy. There was already a growing awareness that tech for tech's sake and the digital by default agenda was not putting community, people, social impact first or at the centre of decision making. And the COVID-19 pandemic really brought all of this to the fore, highlighting and exacerbating the digital divide for many people and groups, and accelerated conversations around digital equity within the City of Casey. Next slide, thanks. So COVID-19 and digital exclusion, look, it really, in a lot of ways, was the perfect storm to approach the problem. It highlighted and exacerbated digital exclusion, as we all know. We all remember that initial panic of what might eventuate, groceries not on the shelves, people not able to access the essentials for life. So really, that renewed focus on the vulnerable, for want of a better term, within community was really strong during that period and still is. With services shifting online, there was a rush to identify who might be most impacted by digital exclusion and how they might be impacted. And there was also an appetite to try new things, test approaches and collaborate across the organisation in a hands-on deck, all hands on deck kind of approach. So our initial responses to, the disaster situation of COVID was really concerning our older people. So a known digitally excluded group and most isolated during lockdowns. Our worst fears of wartime-like deprivation did not eventuate at scale, but it was clear that a program to address barriers of digital access, affordability and skills building was going to be critical going forward. And of course was well overdue. So still with a focus on older persons, we undertook work on what we call the Digital Activation Program. So the Digital Activation Program was a cross-council collaboration that saw a number of projects launched in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Through this program, council teams came together to support projects in new ways and bring a whole bunch of different ideas together. There was greater urgency with usual roadblocks set aside, so some really positive working relationships. Just wanted to quickly highlight some of the projects that came out of this program. Kinder Connect, so it was a digital intergenerational program that we developed to connect children and older people during COVID-19. So obviously aiming to decrease feelings of loneliness being experienced by older people who are isolating. And kindergarten classes were able to exchange messages through both videos and non-digital methods as well, such as letter writing with an older person who was supported by a carer. So that was a really fantastic project. Shopping online initially was a really big project to try and basically build the skills and access for older people to shop online, get their groceries and medicine online. In that regard, we saw a lot of families and neighbours really come to the party and fill that gap in a lot of ways. So it became less of an issue. Getting those essentials really turned to what does all this mean for social connection? How are older people going to connect whilst in lockdown, whilst isolating? That became the really big issue. So that's where Get Connected came about. So that was broadly a device borrowing and digital literacy program to support older people with access to technology and digital skills. Also, so those devices we provided to them, as well as data, it gave them an opportunity to really test new ways of connect with family, connect with friends. It was really a fantastic project that we employed within the community care side of the organisation, and it also won an impact award for Smart Cities Award, Australia and New Zealand. So that was really, really great. Outside of the organisation, we supported U3A, Casey U3A, to deliver a summer school. So essentially they held a summer school at a period where they normally wouldn't run classes for their older cohort members. And mostly online activities were held during this period so that they could stay connected during that difficult period and build those digital skills as well. Beyond, I guess, that target group of older persons, we also had other projects related to increasing health messaging to our cold communities on new platforms and in language. So there was a lot going on during this period that was relevant to digital equity. Next slide, thanks. So again, as a result of these collaborations and successes, the digital equity focus and approach was formalised within the Smart Casey Launchpad with a priority initiative to develop a digital inclusion framework that embeds equitable access to digital channels. That foundation work, I suppose, from that foundation work, it was really clear that there were great outcomes and work being done, but an overarching framework for digital inclusion and equity was required so that we could formalise our organisational commitment, scale up activities to reach our large and diverse population, and also drive innovation in the field. So the foundations of all of this collaborative work saw Casey's Smart Cities approach incorporate strong principles and objectives regarding equity, inclusion and social impact, which was fantastic. And that priority initiative I just mentioned was retitled to Casey's Digital Equity Framework. So what is the Digital Equity Framework? It was developed earlier this year with the purpose of guiding a coordinated all-of-organisational equity approach to addressing digital exclusion, and it aims to provide a shared and comprehensive understanding of digital equity conditions across Casey and those groups and places most excluded. A consistent and pragmatic basis for guiding council digital inclusion activities, an ongoing platform for promoting partnerships to increase digital equity in Casey, a set of initial priorities for action, and an initial group of internal and external partners to assist in the delivery of the framework. And look, really the framework itself is really just a starting point where we'll continue to seek understanding and insights regarding local digital exclusion and innovate solutions based on those local conditions. Next slide, thanks. So really briefly, the components to developing the framework really centered around background research and data, community and stakeholder engagement, as well as a guiding reference group to help out with the work. So the background research and data analysis involved a literature review, which included an analysis of similar approaches frameworks. So nationally, some work had been done in embedding digital inclusion principles, but they were mostly within broader digital and smart city strategies. We had to go further afield to find specific examples of standalone digital inclusion and equity frameworks and strategic plans. New Zealand and a few cities across the United States provided valuable insight here. As far as data goes, the Australian Digital Inclusion Index and the Internet Access Question in the Census provided the central pieces to broadly understand those likely impacted by digital exclusion. And of course, Indigo will talk to the index later on. The community engagement component, that was really around understanding that local experience, both challenges and strengths, and was vital to the framework's development. We were somewhat lucky that face-to-face consultation was possible during the framework development, so as to gain insights from those most digitally excluded. So, as we've all probably experienced, the wicked challenges the pandemic has raised. Attempting to understand digital exclusion through digital channels would have resulted in an incomplete understanding of the issues and those affected. So we really relied on community leaders and networks and community services to link us with a representative cross-section of the community, which was really fantastic. And I'll go through some of those, I guess, key findings a little later. And the reference group really just continuing that cross-organisation work. It guided the development of the framework and brought relevant internal staff in to understand how initiatives would have the greatest impact in their work areas for the benefit of the community. Next slide, thanks. And this is just a bit of a snapshot of that data that I was talking about. It's a bit of a mix of the Australian Digital Inclusion Index and the census question, as well as socioeconomic disadvantage in different suburbs across Casey. So this is really around place-based digital exclusion across Casey. And we see that there's significant place-based digital exclusion in Doveton, Hallam, Cranbourne and Hampton Park. So a lot of our work will focus on how to approach that at a place-based level, and there's work already underway in Doveton to do just that, which is fantastic. Broadly speaking, high rates of socioeconomic disadvantage is correlated with digital exclusion, so that's you know, a really broad measure to understand what the issues are. Next slide, thanks. So as part of the development of the framework, as I mentioned, there was extensive engagement from March to May of this year with individual community members, community groups, education and training providers, and not-for-profit organisations from across Casey providing input. Participants drew on experiences and challenges faced during and post COVID-19 restrictions, when many were required to be online either for the first time or had to undertake more complex digital tasks. This brought about surprising benefits for some groups and many more challenges for most. So I'm not going to obviously go through all of this here, but it just breaks it down by different cohorts, the particular challenges faced. Some of these are common across groups and some are really specific to groups. So, you know, within the older people kind of category, I suppose, you know, we saw reduced loneliness for some people who were able to get online. We also saw increased loneliness for people who weren't able to get online. So there was that real mix of experience for different people and different groups. We really found there were some really interesting findings, you know, such as different community service organisations being able to better collaborate about clients in a way that they hadn't done before. But of course, for our low income cohorts, there was just so much complexity in terms of online services and applications for employment that made it really difficult. Obviously, people living with disability, a lot of meetings don't cater to their needs, so they're excluded from a lot of those meetings, unfortunately. And you know, other issues surrounded safe online environments, which is another interesting angle to digital equity, and also just device shortages across the board. You know, what do you do about device shortages? Next slide, thanks. And again, one of the big things that I'll speak about a little just in the next slide, but we'll be really talking about those online communities that were created during COVID-19 for particular groups, which was really fantastic. But really we found a lot of challenges across these different groups. Thanks for that. Okay, so key insights from the Digital Equity Framework. So as I just said, the creation of online communities, a huge positive for many groups to connect and organise both nationally, regionally, internationally, across different groups such as culturally diverse communities, LGBTIQ plus communities, and disability groups as well. Assumptions about digital skills of groups can be fraught with danger. So we saw a lot of young people expressing that they don't have the skills that people assume they have. And we also saw assumptions about this digital skills and abilities of older people being challenged as well. So some older people have found no issues going online. Beyond simply having digital access, motivation drives digital skills development, even when the present and future benefits seem undeniable. We're seeing now, what is the future of businesses that still deal in cash only? What happens in terms of a cashless kind of system society going forward? What happens to those businesses? It seems like the writing's on the wall, but it doesn't shift through the engagement. It really doesn't shift their feelings on the matter. Traditional digital learning models require a rethink. I mean, we had the luxury as part of our community care service to provide one-on-one learning with, non-expert teachers, and that was really effective with our older learners. Obviously, that's not going to be possible everywhere, but there needs to be some innovation within those learning models. Wi-Fi access points and digital learning opportunities that already exist are inadequately communicated to those who need them most. So really just finding a place for all this information and all the great stuff that is already happening out in community and all the, infrastructure that already exists to be put somewhere where people can find it. And as I spoke about earlier, Casey has significant place-based digital exclusion. Next slide, thanks. And looking forward, just briefly, there'll be a continued focus on research and data in this rapidly evolving space. As I said before, this is just a starting point, and we're going to learn more and more as we go along, as we'll see with Indigo's presentation shortly. There's so much more data available and opportunities to better understand those local conditions. We'll need increased partnerships for that regional approach. We really cannot do this alone. And to get that impact, that widespread impact for our 380,000 people within Casey at the moment, we're really going to need people, other organisations to work with us. Co-designing solutions with our community will be key. So we'll hear about that a little later on with the Digital Equity Living Lab. And there'll be an advocacy agenda that highlights the specific issues found within Casey. So lots of exciting stuff happening now. And yeah, pleased to be here. Glad to hand it back to Laura.